Are you sitting comfortably? Right then, I shall begin. Now it was a sunny summer's morning, very, very early. Only the birds were just starting to stir and the sun was just shimmering through the trees. Sam and Bernard woke up early and straight away they knew we had to have an adventure. So Bernard told Sam, "Do you know, down in Back Gully there's a beautiful little creek with the most wonderful clear pools in it. Why don't we go down there before breakfast, see what we can find, have a bit of a poke around, and then we'll be back home for breakfast and Mum and Dad would never know." So what do you think they decided to do? Just that. So they quickly got on their clothes, put on their boots, and snuck out the back door, being very careful not to shut it too loudly. Then they went over the back paddock, down through the raspberry patch, then under some fern trees. Then they went down the track down to Back Gully. Now the Back Gully track was a very exciting track. It wound down this steep valley, and as it wound down, it got steeper and slipperier, and more rainforest closed in on them. So in fact it got darker, almost a bit like light. Sam, who was younger than Bernard, got a bit worried, but Bernard said, "No, Sam, it'll be fine. We'll be back soon and we'll have a great time." Before long, it evened out, and they were down the bottom of this most beautiful valley beside a gorgeous little creek. And it was so clear. You looked into the water and it was like looking into glass. And they followed this creek down, and it got a little bit bigger, and the sides of the creek became grassy and beautiful glades. And Sam and Bernard loved it so much that they kept on going down. And before long, they came to this pool. And this pool was very big. It was about 20 or 30 feet across. And as they just looked over the edge of the grassy bank into this pool, they saw it was very, very deep. And it looked like crystal. And Sam looked at Bernard, and Bernard looked at Sam. "And where do you think we are?" said Bernard. "I don't know," said Sam. "We're at the crystal pool," said Bernard. "Dad told me about this. He said it's a great swimming place in summer, and he used to catch trout here, big trout." Sam went, "Oh!" and Bernard thought, "I wonder if we can see some of those trout." So they lay on the edge of this bank with just their eyes poking out over the edge of this bank, and it wasn't long before they spied down below them, swimming lazily along in the crystal pool, was this brown trout. And he was so big, so big. "Big as a small pig," whispered Sam. Bernard's heart was fairly pounding in his chest, and he couldn't believe the size of that trout. And he thought, what would that trout taste like for supper tonight? "But," Sam whispered, "we haven't got a fishing line, Bernard. We haven't got any hooks. We'll never get him." And that set Bernard to thinking, how can we get this big trout without a fishing line? So they lay very still, and the cogs started turning in Bernard's mind. Sam got bored, and Bernard said, "Shh, I've thought of a plan." "Sam," said Bernard, "wriggle backwards very slowly, very quietly. Don't disturb that fish." So they did that. They wriggled backwards down the bank. And careful as you like, Bernard said to Sam, "Grab the biggest rock that you can find and slowly sneak up to the bank with it." And so they did it. They both went down and they grabbed these big brinnies, they could hardly hold them up. And gingerly as you want, they came up to the bank and slowly came over. And Bernard said to Sam, when you see that trout swim up near the top of the crystal pool, just underneath us, bomb him with your rock. And do you know they stood there for 15 minutes watching that fish snake around that pool. Slowly, little by little, the fish came up to the surface, just under the surface, just under where they were standing. And as one, these two brothers threw their big rocks down on top of this trout. Boom! Boom! And the trout was stunned. The trout just was paralysed with fear. Must have been concussed. I don't know. But then Bernard did a very brave thing. Bernard dived off this bank, straight into the crystal pool, straight on top of this trout, and just grabbed him and held him to his chest. Well, when that trout found these big arms around him, that trout came out of his concussion, I tell you. And that trout shook, and he wriggled, and he twisted, and he squirmed. And I don't know whether you've ever felt a trout, but they're slimy. So try as hard as he could, Bernard could not hold on to that trout. And after a minute, the trout leapt free of his arms. But the trout was in such a panic, he made a big mistake. So, what was that mistake? The trout went straight up the river, and he leapt out of the river, and he landed in this little pool. Just a little pool, 2 or 3 feet across, and only a foot deep. And he couldn't go anywhere, he was trapped. Now Sam, smaller than Bernard, younger, only 7 or 8 years of age, but Sam was quick as you like into that pool with the trout, and Sam didn't make the mistake that Bernard did. Sam knew what to do with a fish. Sam got his fingers in under the trout's gills, and he grabbed him. And once you got your fingers in under the gills of a fish, that fish will not be able to get free. And Sam grabbed him and dragged him with all his strength and might up onto the rocks. And they killed him there with another big stone. Well, Sam and Bernard were wet through. They were absolutely frozen, blue as you like. Teeth were chattering away. Knees were knocking together. But they had a fish, big as your leg. It was massive. So they got a stick, threaded the stick, big, stout, thick stick, through the gills, and they put one end of the stick on their shoulders, and they carried that trout. It was all of 25 pounds, half Bernard's weight just about, up the track, back through the back gully track, back through the back paddock, round the ferny gully, up through the raspberries, and then they snuck in the back door of the house, just in time for breakfast. Now it was a bit tricky, because they were wet through, freezing cold, and they smelt of trout, even though they left the trout out on the back veranda. And their mum, who was very, very smart, she looked at them. "Sam and Bernard, where have you been? Why are you wet through? You're half frozen. Come over by the fire this instant." And she was about to give them both a smack on the backside because they'd been down to the river, she said, when Bernard said, "Mum, I'm sorry. We just went down to the crystal pool." "Oh," said Mum, "you know you're not supposed to go down to the crystal pool. You know that." And Sam said, "But Mum, we caught a trout." Well, their mum just about fell over backwards. "What do you mean you caught a trout? You can't catch a little trout with your hands. It's impossible. You need a fishing line." And Sam and Bernard both went, "Well, Mum, we caught him with stones and our bare hands, and he's 25 pounds if he's an ounce." Sam and Bernard's mum went out on the back veranda, and when she saw the fish, she just about fainted. She said, "Oh, Pete, come and look at this," she said. Pete was their dad. And their dad, Pete, came and had a look, and was he proud of his sons for catching that big trout. They did get into a bit of trouble, but that night, Sam and Bernard and their mum and dad and their little sister Jane had baked trout. And it was the best fish that Sam and Bernard ever had in their entire lives. And that's the story of Sam and Bernard and the crystal pool.